Oh, and welcome to Power Speaking Live. Thank you so much for joining us today for what is sure to be a very rich discussion. And to get the conversation started, I encourage you to respond to the question I just posed in chat, which is, what do you find most challenging about presenting to executives? I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of Power Speaking Incorporated. Following today's event, this episode, along with all past ones, will be available on our Power Speaking podcast. And we'll share a link of that podcast with you in chat for easy access. Today, we're going to be discussing all sorts of strategies and insights on how to gain support when presenting to senior leaders. And having this opportunity to present to executives, the C-suite, the board of directors, whatever applies in your particular case, can really be a career enhancing experience. It can help you to broaden your impact and influence in so many ways. It can also be a career limiting experience if not handled effectively. I will never ever forget the first time that I had to deliver a presentation to the president of a business unit that I was reporting to many, many years ago in my career. I was brand new to the company and I was in a newly created VP role. And I think I prepared roughly 20 slides for a 30-minute time slot, and we never got off slide 2. After the presentation, I headed to the airport, went straight to the bar, and called my girlfriend and said, I think I'm going to lose my job. It was that bad. Luckily, the president gave me a second chance, but I knew she wasn't going to give me a third. So I had to quickly learn how to navigate this new world that I was suddenly thrust into. So my goal today is to spare you that pain and set you up for success by tapping into the immense talent and expertise we have at our disposal today. I'd like to welcome our expert panelists. First up, we have Brent Krzyzewski. Brent, I like to think of you as a market shaper and change maker. I know that during your many successful years at Shell, you had the opportunity to be at the helm of many critical HR transformations, which had to involve countless proposals and difficult discussions with executives. Am I right?
That's right.
So we're going to tap into all your experience and gain as many insights as we can from you in this short period of time. And I'm so grateful and privileged to have you with us today.
Very happy to be here with you all.
We also have with us 3 of Power Speaking's master facilitators and coaches. First, I'd like to welcome Anshu Arora. Anshu, among many other things, I know that you are an expert at the Pechakucha method of presentations, correct?
That's absolutely right, yes.
Yeah, and that method really forces you to sharpen your thinking and communicate very, very concisely, which of course are 2 ingredients essential to holding your own in high stakes presentations. So we look forward to learning from you.
Absolutely. Look forward to it too, Carrie. Thank you.
You bet. Also with us, we have David Binder. David, you too have many gifts. One I greatly admire is your ability to read the room and flex depending on the verbal and nonverbal cues that you get in the moment, which also is an essential skill to hone to be effective when presenting to executives.
Thanks, Carrie. It's great to be here.
Welcome. Last but not least, we have Payal Gandhi-Hoon. Payal, among your many talents, you have a deep understanding of the executive mindset. For example, I know that you recently hosted, I think, 21 executive interviews through the Guiding Light series. And through that experience and many, many other experiences you have, you've gained all sorts of insights on What works and what doesn't when interacting with executives?
That's absolutely right, Carrie. And it's absolutely a pleasure to be able to share what I've learned along the way.
Wonderful. So let's get into it. And let's lead off by starting with, what is it that makes executive presentations so different than any other? How about if each of you share one top thing that comes to mind, leading off with you, Brent?
Thanks. Well, actually, there's three things that I really think are profound. One is executives have a lot on the line. They're paid and expected to operate at a much higher level. So this translates to the fact that they want to leverage their leadership competence, which is all about their cognitive abilities, their relationships, to maximize their time and their impact, which is really their achievement level. The next thing is really, it's all about having an enterprise view, which they have a different view of the world based on that cognitive capacity and achievement and their view of relationships. And the last thing I'd say is, when you go up that leadership pipeline, remember, leaders are like the top 1% of the organization. And as you go up, if you read books like Harvard Business Review books on this topic, or the leadership pipeline, you'll see when you start your career, you start out like at lower roles like analyst and things like that, until you get up to a strategic thinker that thinks broadly and deeply. At the executive presentation level, if you deliver a presentation as an analyst to a broad strategic thinker, there's going to be a huge disconnect, and it's going to go pear-shaped. So those are the kind of things that you really want to look at. And remember, that capacity is, because of their intellectual capacity, they easily pick up concepts and understand issues. So if you're not clear and concise, they're going to get really frustrated. And the achievement level, remember, they've got a million things that they've already approved or that's already in the works, and they've got to balance the organization's capability. So anytime they get a new proposal, they have to put something that they already had on their plate at a lower level or move it off. So their job's about, taking their time and attention to another competing priority or another potential opportunity against something that they might have already previously supported or endorsed. So their job is to make sure that portfolio of work and energy in an organization is getting the right things done the right way and at the right time, so that the portfolio of energy in the company is most efficiently expended. So that would be the bottleneck of the concept that I would say is the three big things.
There's a lot packed in there, and everything you said, Brent, just underscores why it's so important that you get training and experience and guidance and lots of preparation to be effective in that kind of scenario.
And if you look at executive competencies, I mean, the competencies that they're expected to deliver is this broad conceptual understanding. And the higher up you go, the further out into the future, and the broader out into the future, and the more integrated into the future that leader has to think. So remember, if you're getting an analyst, it's an expert that's very detailed at something, and an expert, they've got to change their pattern of behavior to present. And they've got to look at the competencies that the executives are expected to have, and they should gear that presentation to those higher level competencies.
Oh, beautifully said, beautifully said. Anshu, what would you add?
Well, Carrie, what has always made practical sense to me in my experience with the C-suite is the answer to the question, what is the ROI, the return on investment of your ask? Why should the executives or decision makers invest time, resources, or funds in your ask? Putting that right up front as you make a presentation makes a lot of sense to me when I'm in the C-suite room. So I think I'll take that one point on that.
Excellent, excellent. And that aligns with the point that you made, Brent, in terms of they're making critical decisions all the time. And most likely, if they're going to consider yours, they're going to have to, it's going to be a trade-off. So that, that ROI, that business rationale ought to be super, super compelling.
Right.
Great. David, what would you add?
I think for me, the biggest difference is when I'm with my team, with a group of peers, I'm a presenter. I have control. I can control the agenda. I can control when questions get asked and how to respond to those. But when I am with a group of decision makers, I take off the presenter hat, I put on a facilitator hat. And so I have to almost behave as if I'm in control, but I'm really not. It's their meeting, right? So I have to think about me being there in service to them making an effective business decision. So when I think about being a facilitator, I have to do that really confidently. So I have to go where they want to go with confidence. And I can't be like hyper focused on getting through all my slides.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I never got through my 20, as I mentioned. Just
That's
one.
why I
just
said
two.
that, Carrie. That's why I
Yeah.
said that. Remembering your experience.
Thanks for making me relive it again. All right, Payal, what would you add?
Well, I'd just say, Carrie, that it's so important to what everybody, my co-panelists have said, that for a presenter, the first thing that we need to think differently from a different mindset is to stop thinking like a presenter and start thinking as somebody who's a trusted business advisor to the executives. And if I was to unpack the trusted business advisor, it really means having that credibility in place, those insights that work for the executives. The other element is reliability. And reliability is really bringing alive whatever you've confirmed to the executives that you're going to be working upon. And finally, it is the intimacy piece. Though I know in the business world, it sounds a little too soft and deep, but intimacy really entails the human touch. Connect with your executives because ultimately they're human beings, and divided this by self-orientation as a presenter. So the lower our self-orientation is in terms of whether I will strike that chord, whether I will win that deal, whether what I'm saying is making sense, all of that needs to be out of the window. And what needs to be in focus is to really align with what the executives want, ultimately towards the business outcome.
Excellent. Excellent. All great points. And I'm sure what's going through the minds of many members in our audience is, okay, so how do we do all these things? Before we get there, I'd like to just go a little deeper on something to lay the foundation. In our Speaking Up, Presenting to Decision Makers workshop, one of the things we talk about at the outset is the critical importance of understanding the executive mindset. And Brent, you provided a lot of insight into that. Payal, can you add a little bit more on that and why it matters and how it influences the ways in which you change your pattern of behavior, as Brent said?
Right, absolutely spot on, Carrie. I would say there are two important factors at play in terms of executive mindset. One is really understanding and knowing the audience to understand their mindset. And which really means is understanding what are the executive needs, what are the expectations, what are the preferences of the executive. And that entails knowing very, very, very granular things like knowing who the executive is, putting a face to the name, knowing their personality type. Are they really risk averse? Are they conservative? Or are they more innovative? Or they want to try new things? Or also knowing what is their stance on the ask that you're making. So are they in favor of what you're seeking out, that budget approval? Or are they not in favor because maybe there are more prime priorities that are working there as well? It could be expectations that they have that, you have some executive summary that's being sent out to them beforehand or a report there. Or it could be a detailed report there. Now, that's really about knowing the executives to understand the mindset. And I would say the second part really is to understand, what is important about the executive mindset. Like we understand one of the HBR reports, came up with the understanding here that executives are really at the helm of all business decisions. So they're calling shots on different things. And the idea is to understand what is really, really working for them and what's not really working for them. And as a trusted business advisor, the idea is to tune in and lean into that particular audience. So on a lighter note, if I was to, before I wrap up on this, I'd like to share that recently on my trip to London, I had the opportunity of watching a play, and I'm very fond of plays and I'm into performances, which is called Anne and Juliet. So this is really a spin-off on Juliet, Romeo and Juliet, and Anna Hathaway, the wife of Shakespeare, is actually urging Shakespeare, saying, let's rewrite the script. Let's change the ending of the play and not have Juliet die when she discovers her lover is dead. Because she's merely 13. What if Juliet lives? So the point that I'm making here is, can we start understanding the audience that we are presenting to and play to the global view and changing mindset of the audience?
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Payal. And you made me think of an example, again, going back earlier in my career. I was with a very large global company, and I had done many presentations to senior leaders in the US, but I was going to be making my first presentation to the executive team in EMEA. And in the US at this time, the best practice, and at any time you were presenting to the executives, is you bring your printed executive briefing that you pass out. So I didn't do my homework, and I assumed that the protocol was the same in EMEA. They were more forward thinking and being more conscientious about reducing wasted paper. I come into the room, the first thing I do is start distributing this packet, and the president of the group looked at his team and they all started snickering. I had no idea what they were talking about. And, they explained it to me, but first impression, I hadn't even said anything, and I'm looking out of touch. So that level of homework, getting that insight from the executive assistant is so very important. Payal, so on the subject of doing your homework, really quickly, what's some advice you'd share with regard to things you can do in advance of that actual presentation to set yourself up for success?
Well, I would say, like
and I'm so sorry, Payal. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to pass that one to Anshu. Forgive me.
Absolutely, Kari.
Okay, no worries. When we talk about, Carrie, as you mentioned, the importance of doing that homework and what happens in the absence of it. Carrie, what I've realized that, when I coach people who are ready to present to the C-suite, there's a typical mindset that I've observed, which is that they refrain from a conversation with the executives. They'd like to stay tight and in control. And in my experience, the power of homework is immense. The moment you indulge into not only becoming, empowering yourself with your expertise on the subject, not only with that, if you understand the environment you're going to be in, the audience that you're going to be speaking with, I've realized that there are two formulas which we speak about even in our workshops, that work wonderfully well and help initiate a conversation with the executives. And that's what really drives us to the decision. And that power comes from doing our pre-work. So the two formulas that I've always used and they work well is noticing and asking, what's the commotion in the room all about? And secondly, acknowledging and recommending. So may I dare say that these are brave things to do. So while presenting to a decision maker, when a presenter notices a disagreement or an apprehension, it is absolutely okay to say that I notice that there is a question. I would like to ask what's crossing your mind. Or, why I say that's a daring task, because you cannot do this unless you've done your homework well. You won't dare put this question up. And you're ready to take on any question head on only when you've done that pre-work, whether it's your product, whether it's people, whether it's your solution. The second strategy is acknowledge and recommend. A C-suite presenter must definitely read the room. Like you said, David is very good at that, and I so agree. I acknowledge, I have had situations where I've seen clear disagreements, and I've gone ahead and said that, I acknowledge that you have a valid concern. It could be from a past experience or any unsuccessful task in the past. So acknowledging the elephant in the room
Mhm.
and then recommending a solution around it is what has got me success. So I would strongly encourage good homework and then initiating an evidence-driven conversation around it. That is the power of the homework, and that's what helps sail us through. And all this power comes from preparing in advance.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anshu. And, as David, you pointed out, you're not in control. However, you need to project confidence and you need to have the courage to acknowledge what's going on and address it. We've got some questions coming through in chat, so let's take those before moving on. This one is directed at you, Anshu. Having the good fortune of experiencing your coaching and delivery, I'd like to know, what's the secret to presenting with confidence? We're just talking about that. Is it content? Is it brevity? Is it body language? All of these, or are there many ingredients to a secret formula? So Anshu, of course, you talked about one of the things that can help give you confidence is that in-depth preparation and anticipating the various objections and questions you might get. What other few tips would you add? And then we can open it up to others.
I'll start by saying all of this plus more. So what I've realized that, and as we'll talk about it gradually about executive presence as well, it's all to do with your confidence and maturity on the floor. How well can you think on your feet? And without being arrogant or argumentative, how do you exhibit that openness to be challenged as a subject matter expert?
Mm.
Once you're in control and you can pose this, and that comes from the gray matter and the homework that you've done, then that will count for an ultimate confidence that you can exhibit on the floor. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Thank you. Brent, is there anything you would add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about being prepared. It's about the forensic A to B diagnostics you've done. And you want to show these executives that you've done a great work plan. Your work product is undisputed. It's indisputable, and it's just relevant. And if you do that, I think that you're going to walk in there with confidence.
Great. Great. Well said. We also have a comment and question from Hannah. When I present to execs, they may jump from very high level to wanting to do a deep dive in certain costs. I find it hard to prepare for this in terms of a presentation. In other words, too much detail in the presentation can lead to complaints. So this is a great point. So we're supposed to keep it high level, yet we have to be prepared for them to go really deep at any moment. What advice do you have? Anyone?
I would just say many times the executives do go down bunny holes. I mean, they'll have a bias, they'll have their own data, they'll have some perspective that they want to say, whoa, stop. I've done this and you can't tell me that because you can't tell me how many expats we have in Australia. So how are we ever going to do this? So they'll derail it. And it's part of their executive portfolio because they're all trying to put their voice in the room. And if they can chop off a presentation and say, we don't even need to listen to this because I can prove it's irrelevant to this point, they think they're saving people's time and saying, go back to the drawing board. But again, this is where people have to get in. If you're really going to do executive presentations, you have to get into the neuroscience of executive presentations. There's so much about cognitive bias and all the other terms that go with that, the nuclear kind of stuff that they're thinking about. So I would suggest if people are really interested in executive presentations, they get into that kind of neuroscience of it all.
Okay. Oh, wonderful advice. Anything else anyone would like to add to Hannah's question?
I would just say real quickly from a practical standpoint, in terms of preparation, I think you prepare at the high level for what you actually are going to present in the room. But then you also are prepared for additional questions. You might have a backup deck, you may have the data in some other way of backup information so that you can confidently refer to it if you have to. So it's a little bit more work, right? You're preparing what you're actually presenting, and then you're prepared to respond to those questions as well. But I wouldn't put the detailed responses to the question in the presentation automatically.
Totally agree, David. That's where an appendix can be your friend. So keep your business case high level, pithy, very compelling with lots of data to support the business rationale, but be prepared to go deep. And again, one of the themes here is that forensic preparation. So on the subject of leading at a high level, because these are enterprise global thinkers, we know it's critically important that you lead with your bottom line, including your ask and your very brief business rationale. Yet executives tell us time and time again, one of the biggest mistakes presenters make is taking too long to get to the point. I personally have been the recipient of this. David, any advice or stories or examples you can share?
I'll just share a quick story, and I think it'll be a good teaching lesson for everybody. Several years ago, I was working with a large Fortune 500 company here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I live. And they had created a cohort of about 12 high potential leaders who they were taking through a 3-month development experience. And I was part of the group that was a part of that experience. My biggest focus was on kind of fundamental leadership skills. But as a part of the program, they were each given, in groups of 4, a problem in the organization, asked to analyze the problem and then make recommendations to the executives. Despite the coaching that they got, the first group got up and they were about, I'd say, 5 minutes into explaining the problem, and the chief marketing officer literally interrupted them. Very impatient tone. And this is what he said. He said, "We know what the problem is. You don't have to convince us. What should we do about it?" And so I think there were a couple of things at play there. One is the presenters stayed in their comfort zone. They were really convinced that they analyzed that problem and knew what it was. But the other thing I don't think they appreciated is that it wasn't the executive's role to analyze the problem. They didn't have time to analyze the problem. That's what they were expecting these high potential leaders to do. And they were expecting to hear their recommendations within 1 or 2 minutes of the presentation. So talk about a great learning experience. I guarantee those 12 people never made that mistake again. And we've heard this over and over and over again from people. It's not a murder mystery, right? Tell us the solution, tell us the recommendation right out of the gate.
Well said. Well said. Brent, what can you add? What advice do you have for people that struggle to take this approach, to have the courage to lead with that bottom line?
Well, again, it's like the old Stephen Covey, you begin with the end in mind. You start with that grand idea. What's the strategy? What's the ask you're in the room for? What do you really want from them? But then what you really have to do, and we've talked a little bit about, making sure your work product, your forensic storyline is really solid, make sure it's impressive. I used to do a lot of research. Anytime I would do a executive presentation, I would go to the world leading experts for this social proofing. And I'd say, in my back pocket, I did talk to the 5 leading experts at MIT, Harvard, wherever it was. And I said, this is what their opinion is on the topic. Or I go to NASA or, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and I would have that really credible storyline, because you have to build, and you only have that 30 minutes to build trust. And if you look at that old trust equation, they want to see you as credible, reliable, and have some level of intimacy that you've dug into the organization as key players, and you've done your socialization of all the people that they wanted you to socialize with, all their lieutenants, so that you can say, I did talk to Joe and Jane and Jill, and they're all on your team, and they like what I'm doing, and they thought, you would have a good interest in this. And then you want to make sure that your self-interest doesn't show like you've got an agenda that's for yourself or for some unified purpose beyond the enterprise. And so that's what I would do in terms of those things. And again, always allow some time for them to give you strategic questioning. And these are questions You want to talk about like the focus questions, the observation questions, the visioning question, questions about alternatives, questions about change, because they're going to have all those kind of questions. And remember, you have to anticipate the questions. And there's two types, and we could talk about it later, but the common cultural questions that executives in that organization always ask. I could go into an executive presentation. I could know that the VP of upstream is going to ask this question, the VP of downstream or EVP is going to ask this question, and then the person in finance is going to ask this question. They were the cultural common questions, and I'd always be prepared to answer those. But then you have the resistor questions, and that's a whole nother topic that I can talk about later on in the session.
Wonderful. I hope you all in the audience were taking notes. There was a lot in there, Brent. Just a few things I want to highlight. You talked about the power of those proof points to have in your back pocket, the reinforcement from the really, really credible sources, whether it be MIT, NASA, whatever. Which helps to enhance your own credibility and the trust that they have in you. Also, this concept of anticipating the various types of questions that must come up and being prepared for those. And then also, you talk again about the fact that you are speaking to these high-level executives that are focused on the entire enterprise. Therefore, part of your homework better be socializing, right? With all of the impacted groups and be prepared. Did you speak to Joe about this? Well, what does Diane have to say? Yes, I did. And here's what we found out. So excellent point. There was one other thing you mentioned, the socializing. Oh, I just love this point because this to me is a way in which you can instantly lose your credibility. Instantly. Your motive better be pure. Your motive better be representing what's best for the enterprise and not
because they'll find it out. They'll
uncover it so fast.
Find you out, and then you really lost credibility. So, but yeah, I think the biggest thing's always to be able to get that, because they want that inside out view. They want to know what's it like in the context of our organization and what's it like outside. Because here's the thing, no matter how well NASA does it, if it doesn't fit in the context of Shell or BP or Chevron, it's not going to work. So even when you do benchmarking, you've got to make the benchmarking relevant to your own internal organization. Yep. So you do want the outside thought leadership, but you got to make sure it fits inside.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot to this. This is why it takes a lot of practice, a lot of training, a lot of coaching, a lot of failure, a lot of experience. All right. I see Sarah Palmer, a question that came up today in a training and often does. What advice does the panel have on how to read the room in a virtual situation? Oh my, and this is obviously more and more and more commonplace today. Presenters often talk at the group and are so focused they don't read the signs that they're losing the group. Oh gosh, Sarah, such a good question. Who wants to take this one?
I can take it up, Carrie. So to this, I would say, it's signs like, and especially Sarah mentioned virtual environment, and you could have the executives turn off their cameras. As simple as that for starters. Now, are you really going to call out and say, Brent and David, if you could have your cameras on so that we could, and like you said, it could be a career limiting move, absolutely. So in terms of that, maybe look at what you can do in terms of pattern disruption. And what I mean by pattern disruption is instead of continuing to talk, as a presenter, because again, that's the presenter's hat that's on, what is it that you do to understand is happening in the room? Maybe the camera's gone off, your executives are not responding to you, and that could be an extreme condition. So a good idea is to take a pause, read the room, of course, because people are not responding, and maybe in the stream of, and that's where thinking on feet really plays an important role. Think of a point that the executive made or segue into what the discussion is about so that you can connect it back, saying, for instance, I'm playing Brent as the executive here and say, Brent did mention that we need to focus on strengthening our brand value. And he had a very interesting point. So maybe that's one way of engaging the interest of the executive rather than calling up directly.
Great advice, Payal. And I think a key thing to remember here, pardon me, whether it's virtual, hybrid, or in person, you're going in to facilitate a discussion and help the executives make the best decision on behalf of the enterprise. This is not a one-way presentation. So I think that is one of the keys. So you want to make sure, as it relates to how you facilitate that discussion, how you make your case, there's interaction built into that. That will automatically, whether the cameras are on or off, give you the clues you need to determine whether the audience is with you. Is there
Carrie, may I
anything?
just add may I just add a little point here, Carrie, which is a flip side of this. And the flip side of this, Carrie, is that sometimes we need to pause. We all think about what to do, this strategy, that, and the other. But there are many times, in fact, I was in a very close interaction with CEO of an organization, and he was speaking to someone about how the meeting did not go well and why it did not go well. And he said a very interesting statement. He said, sometimes you just need to pause and do nothing. And that sometimes can be the game changer, because not everything needs a reaction, not everything needs a response. And sometimes, like I said, there's a very thin line between projection of aggression, very thin line of, okay, I want to take it head on. What I've seen works really well initially is, just when you're ready to take off, is to pause a little and remember that it's not the suede shoes that are going to roll you through. It's going to be your content. And if you've done your homework right, you will sail through. So sometimes in that hurry of attending to that question or taking lead, we don't pause and we don't get the full perspective. And it's only when we pause, we get the full perspective. It's happened to me so many times that in just another second, the executive gets to exactly what I was going to say. That marries the solution wonderfully well. So
Great.
I think there's a very thin line, and that comes with maturity on the floor, that you hold on a bit. And then now it's time to take off and then do.
Thank you. Yeah, never underestimate the power of the pause. Someone else is contributing here. Many a times execs are really impatient and they may be abrupt a lot of times. How strong, self-assertive one should be to keep them engaged?
Well, I think I can take that up, Carrie. I think the question in here is more to do with interruptions that happen when you're presenting, and in India especially, we call this hijacking of a presentation. So when you're just about making a presentation, and the executive in the room just gets up and says, "Okay, cut that out," and that's what I'm talking about. I think when we do speak of various aspects in our workshop, we start by saying that the presenter goes really small. And what takes larger importance is the executive in the room. So, of course, you have to pause for a bit and see where it's going. But I guess at the end of it, it is the evidences and the homework that you've done that you support, that you use to support your point, will take you through.
Great, thank you. And let's build on this. As we established, this is both a business case that you're making, but you're also facilitating a discussion. A good rule of thumb is you prepare for the total time slot. A third of it should be content, 2/3 of it should be open for discussion. Brent, what advice do you have for effectively managing those conversations, the disruptions, the arguments that will inevitably be exhibited in some of these settings?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. because it happens. And at Shell, again, there was always an expectation to do a lot of socialization in advance of executive presentations. So the purpose was really to get the executive input and buy-in, and we did like a pre-read for them and then a physical onboarding meeting, which it was very time intensive, very hard to do, oftentimes very hard to get on their schedules, but it ensured that the executives were consulted, their input was collected, it ensured they were briefed on all the issues and they could get their fingerprints on what was going on. The worst thing would be to present to an executive and embarrass them. So use a term that they didn't understand or a concept they didn't know. And that would be the worst thing to do. So this is all in line with kind of Sun Tzu's, you want to strike, make a preemptive strike. So the best way to win the battle is to win it before it's ever fought. Not to say that executive presentations are battles or they're the enemy, but you want to make sure that you kind of already won the proposal before you get in the room. So that, as you said, a third of it's really content and 2/3 is for them to socialize with their own inner network so they're comfortable with themselves, because it's really more about them being comfortable that they agreed as a group on the proposal. So that's what I would say about that.
Great. Thank you so much, Brent.
And I'll just say one other thing, because this, I always find this really important. I always used Robert Cialdini's influence principle. So pre-boarding and all that socialization with all their lieutenants to say, did you talk to Joe and Jill? That's about the reciprocity. So if you do that for them, where you help them look good in that meeting, they're going to feel heard and they're going to help you succeed in the room. And that same thing with commitment and consistency. So if they get their fingerprint or you remove their bias or you incorporate their bias, that's great. And you show them that kind of crowd wisdom of their own organization agrees with what we're doing. And then again, like I always say, use authority. Let them know, give them confidence that you've talked to all the leading experts in the organization and outside the organization, because they're going to always ask you that in the room.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that comes back to that great point you made about making sure you're doing both outside perspective and lens as well as inside. This may work and be a best practice, but how is it going to work in our environment? I like that. And I like the reciprocity. That brings to mind one of the things we talk about that can really be an aid for you in the moment when you might get into some of that unexpected challenges, is the concept of making sure you secure an executive sponsor. Work with that executive sponsor up front who can help you help provide that intel, but also be an advocate as needed in the moment. I can't believe it, are nearing our time. I would love if we could have a part 2, because we're just scratching the surface with this. So in the absence of a part 2, could we close with each of you sharing your parting advice? We talked about a lot of complexities, a lot of challenges. What advice do you want to leave the audience with to help them succeed in these environments? And we'll start with you, Anshu.
Well, I have a slightly fun advice. Well, whenever you're a tad bit worried about a C-suite presentation, just remember, they put the pants on just like you do. So be the popular one, take up the opportunities and present, and you'll never know when you're already there and you've cracked the code.
Love it. I love it. And you know what? You may fail. I gave an example of failing, and it was one of the best lessons I've ever had. So just stretch. You don't grow unless you stretch and take some risk. Payal.
So Carrie, I would say the first thing is it is an absolute honor to be able to present up to the executives. So I would say a presenter should always start with that mindset, because it is tapping into the acumen and the deep expertise of the executives. Yes, we all feel the shudders and we all feel scared when we're walking into the lion's den to present. And like Anshu said, they wear the pants just like we do. So the key really is to go with a mindset in line with your story, where you said, well, you learned by failing as well. There is no failure, but there is only redirection that is happening every time. So you get better at it the more you continue to do this as much as possible. And my final piece would be that if you are an aspiring executive and you want to make it up the ladder, then I think you need to start thinking as the executive, and presenting up really is the accelerated growth path.
Excellent point. Excellent, Payal. How about you, David?
I would just say that the audience is on your side. You know, they really want you to be successful. So don't take it personally if they challenge you, if they ask you really tough questions, because it really is not about you. It's about them getting the information they need to make a decision to advance the business.
Well said. Brent, bring us home.
Yeah, so I always like to answer questions like in three parts, but you know, that's one of the things I do in executive presentation, because they can usually remember three things, you know. Always follow a decision or opportunity cycle. So I can go and say, how did you do step 3 of the cycle, which, you know, you frame the opportunity decision, you gather data, you generate alternatives or options, you assess and evaluate, and then you make recommendations. And that's the workflow. And they want to know how you did that. So you should be able to go in the room and I followed the decision cycle. It's approved. It's, you know, and they've done all the right things. And then, as we've always talked about, is have world-class product work behind the work. But the last thing, I brainstormed this. I don't mind if I read this to you. These, I've reflected on my experiences, and these are kind of the questions, the resistor questions that I would get. And I'm sure they might resonate with your audience. So, you know, there were common cultural questions like, where did you get the data? How do you know it's valid? Who checked it? You know, who did you socialize this with? I knew those questions were coming, you know, how did we, but the resistor questions, we're unique. It won't work here. We tried that before. What makes you think you can make it happen? It's too risky. The MVP isn't there. We've always done it this way. Why would we change? We don't have the resources. It's not a priority. It's too complicated. It'll disrupt our workflow. It's too time consuming. Our customers, clients won't like it. It goes against our values, our identity. We don't have the expertise or resources to spare. It's not the right time. Our competitors aren't doing it. Why would we want to do it? So those are some of the common resistor questions you get. You always have to be able to answer those in the room. So I would always say, what are the general culture questions and what are the typical questions I'm always going to get? So that's what I'd stop on. So know what you're getting into when you get in the room.
Excellent. Excellent. Do your audience analysis. Anticipate those cultural questions, those resistant questions. All right. Thank you so much for your advice. And also, audience, thank you so much for your engagement. Wonderful questions and input. We have some resources that we've shared with you in chat, so please check those out. And in closing, we are going to give you a peek into what we are going to cover next month, which actually is the opposite of this topic. We're going to be talking about communication skills essential that senior leaders possess to effectively engage and connect and align their workforce. So I hope you can join us. And before you jump off, I would love if you could share in chat topics that you'd be interested in learning more about in future upcoming events. Thank you so much for your participation today.